Hello, everyone. Great to see you again. So we have talked about billing in a few videos. I think I would like to move on a bit and so start to talk about various elements in the financial part of CCMB, because until you actually know the big picture, it's very hard to combine everything together. Okay, so today I would like to start to talk about the payment and how payment actually works in C2M. Again, we break it down into multiple topics. We start with an overview on the payment. Then we talk about what is payment event, what is the tender, and after that we look at the payment distribution, and at last we have a look at the entity involved within this process. Okay, so part one, overview. Okay, so here we look at some very basic concepts for payment. So first of all, a payment is distributed among account service. So payment is on the level of account. And these service could be including, let's say, metered service, for example, consumption-based. A non-metered service could be let's say, lamppost, which is not consumption measured, but it's actually provided as service and is probably fixed price every month. And also intangible service. It could be a insurance service or any other types of service the utility provides. Secondly, a payment is linked to an account. A payment segment is created for each service agreement received a portion of payment. So when the payment is received, we will talk a bit in details. So it will create, so actually what that system is doing is create a payment event, and payment event will create payment, and the payment will be distributed into service agreement level, and each service agreement will be matching to payment segment. So a payment will be divided into one or multiple payment segments. Okay, last, a payment segment has one FT. So the pay similar to the bill segment. Okay, so payment segments also have financial transaction. If it's canceled subsequently, they have two, because they're same as the billing. Payment would have a positive and negative financial transaction to cancel each other in case of cancellation. And a payment segment financial transaction contain the financial effects of the segment on the current and the payment payoff balance. Okay, so we touch upon the what is difference between the current and the payoff balance, and check back the video when we talk about billing. So basically, the current means what the customer actually think they actually owns, and the payoff is how much they actually owns. So this is something, for example, it is very often used in terms of direct debits. So if you paying direct debit for £30 a month, you actually own £30. The customer think they own £30 a month, but actually, if you want to, let's say, finish the payment or neutralize the payment on the service agreement, you have to pay off all the balance on the remaining term of that service, which is let's say if there's one year left, that's going to be 30 times 12 months. So this is the key difference. Similarly, payment segment will be fitting into one of these criteria as well. It depends on what the payment is, and it will be matching correctly to the to the balance as well. Okay, part two, we'll talk about more details in terms of payment event and tender. On the left, there is an example. So on the top, there is payment event, and the payment is made on the 31st March 1999. And a tender is actually a part of the payment event in terms of the entity model. So tender is actually what constitutes this payment event. So it could be the total of the payment is say $200, 100 is cash and 100 is check. So there will be two tender. But it's also possible that we will have just one tender for each of the payment events. It depends on the way the customer has paid. Okay. Now, on the other side is the payment. The tender is actually the remittant, which is who actually pays it. And payment is what is owned in the system for this account. So, for example, the customer actually owned the amount and then they paid for it. So, normally, this payer and the payee is actually the same person. Okay, normally, but we will discover the special cases where they are not. So, in the case of this tender, which have $100 in terms of tender amount, the payment is also $100, which matches the tender, and the payment has been distributed into two payment segments on different service agreements. So one for electricity and one for gas. So they're divided into $32 and $68. And both of these service accounts sitting on the same account where the tender is matching to as well. Okay, so this is the basic concept, how things are linked together, and what are the objects getting involved in terms of this process. So on the right-hand side, let's have a quick go through. So a payment event is required whenever any form of payment is received. A tender is required for every form of tender remitted. Example, if both cash and check are remitted, the event would have two tenders. The total tender amount is allocated to one or more accounts with payment. Each account gets a separate payment. So, as I mentioned, the tender can be separated. Let's use the technical term called distributed into different accounts. Okay, we will talk about the distribution a bit later. And then the payee stat is relieved by the payment. Actually, it's relieved by the pay segment because pay segment generates a financial transaction which relieves the payee's debt. And payer is the one who remit the tender. Normally, the payer equal to the payee, normally. But there are special cases as well. Okay, so we look at how the payment is entered. Obviously, I'm not talking about a very common case where um, how the payment actually is received every day during business. Because normally what we have is we will have the payment is received from the customer, and we normally load a file, etc. But over here, I just want to see when it hits C2M, or when within C2M, what can be what form of the payment entry could be happening. Okay, so one case is the payment event. So the payment event transaction allow you to enter a single payment event and enable you to identify multiple tenders and the other um, uh, details for a payment. So, for example, there's a bit more complex payment structure. So we normally use payment event, and this is actually something being used for most of the project. To be honest, even when you load a payment file from external system, we start to create payment events. But there is another way of creating payments. It's called payment quick add, and when do we use this? This is something really quick for the payment. So normally what happens is when you use this quick add, it just creates one um, uh, payment event with one tender and matched to a single account. That's basically quickly distribute to the accounts. In either case, you may use a match type to direct the payment to a specific service agreement or to pay a specific bill. Okay, so the match type is something. It's more of a configuration where you can say, okay, how do I actually match payments with the financial transaction? Essentially, all the payments need to match with financial transaction, but it will be down to whether financial transaction to the level of service agreement or aggregated to the account level, where it will match to a particular bill. Okay, so look at the payment distribution. Okay, so before we go into the payment distribution, I think we need to go through these boxes, which is the basic concept in terms of what happens in a distribution. In terms of payments, I think a lot of the behavior is similar to billing. When we are talking about billing, we see 99% of the bills are automatically generated. Similar to payments. I mean, payments that should not require menu intervention. Normally, the payment is loaded into a system and should be automatically distributed. And if there's any overpayments, it should automatically be resolved and allocated. So this is why when we talk about distribution, we talk about various algorithms, and they happen at different stage of the life cycle of payments. And similar to bill, because CCMB doesn't actually have a business object concept, so a lot of these algorithms are plugged in on the various sports. For example, customer class, for example, service agreement type. So we would need to understand what is happening, what is the life cycle. But before that, for today, we will basically go through these simple and basic concepts before we move on to the next part for payments. Okay, so let's go through these boxes. So first of all, a payment must be distributed to one or more SA for financial impact to be realized. The payment distribution is an algorithm linked to account customer class. So in the customer class, I think there are various plugins for payments, but I mean, for this particular one, we're talking about for distribution. There are two base class base algorithm provided. One of them I've written here is based on the combination of age of each service agreement debt and the distribution priority of each service agreement service type. Okay, so the second one is actually based on the bill due date. So that will be matching the open item in that sense. But you always be able to define your own algorithm based on the project requirement. Okay, so next is if the system cannot distribute a payment, for example, there is no service agreement on the account, then payment status becomes error and payments appears on a to-do list. Overpayment. If a payment is made for more than what is owed for the accounts, the system calls the overpayment algorithm customer class. Base algorithm runs as put the overpayment on the highest priority service agreement or keep overpayment on a separate SA. Okay, that is really down to your business requirements. And so there are two concepts here is how do we define a payment has overpayment? That is matching on the, so we talk about current balance and the payoff balance. Normally that's based on payoff balance. Secondly, what do we put the overpayment if there is? Now that's based on the algorithm we're just talking about here. Okay. So next one is the SA's payment segment type controls how system creates FT associated to payment segment. Unlike bill segments, the financial transaction only created when the payment is frozen. For billing, I remember the financial transaction is created in pending and then get frozen. But for payments, that is a bit different. Now, the last one, by default, system creates one payment for a payment event, but there are cases where many payments are created. So, for example, a console pays for many accounts. So, normally we are talking about a payment has one tender in most of the cases. I mean, if you are loading, let's say, loading a payment file, and 99% of the case you have just single source of payments. Okay, so that goes to one tender and it's mapped to one account or one particular bill. And then the payment is also created for one, and that's just doing the matching. But there could be cases where we talk about a special case of customer. So imagine you have a local council. I think in different countries call different things. But a local council is like a local government, and they probably is a special agent for their local business. So they actually pays for all these business, although different business have different accounts. Okay, so in those cases, they make one payment, but the business, you need to understand, where these um, where these payments can be mapping to. Now, in CCMB, as you know, you have person, you have account. Same person can be linked to multiple accounts. And in those cases, if you have a single agent, which is, let's say, a single customer, and you could have multiple accounts linked to it. And you will need some algorithm to work out, how the multiple payments should be created. And again, that is the project specific requirements. Right. Then we talk about something called distribution rules. There are two scenarios I can think of to trigger distribution rules. So first, if there are many payments are required for payment events, like I was mentioning earlier, and or the second is they don't know the account number. Okay, so there is no information from the source of the customer for the account number. This it is not very common because normally you generate a bill, the customer pays for the bill. They don't actually the customer the first thing customer call in, the agent asks them is, what is your customer number or account number? So in those cases, if there is no account number being mentioned, then there must be another way of identifying where the payment should be applied to. Now, the solution is there are a couple of steps need to be applied. Okay, so first of all, you have to enable the distribution rule in the feature config. So that the payment events must always refer to a distribution rule, or if you allow payment events to support both distribution rule or non-distribution rule, you can also allow it. Secondly, set up the default distribution rule so the user doesn't have to select it on every payment. So there will be a default one. Normally there's only one. Okay, so that rule would encapsulate all the logics you want to apply. Now, if you allow both methods, as we said, either using distribution rule or not, set yes for the payment advice functionality supported option in the FT option in the feature config. If you requires a distribution rule for all the payment events, but if you don't, if that's optional, set that to no. The last one is the actual rule. So you need to define a distribution rule. You can find that in the admin menu. So define a distribution rule, for example, distribute to a contract number and a distribution value, which is the contract number, for example, that's a characteristic on the account. And then configure the create payment algorithm and also determine tender account algorithm. So these are the steps for you to define distribution rule to automatically work out, where the payment should be applied to in the scenarios above. Okay, so last we go through the entity relationship. So over here we have a few new concepts. I think we haven't talked about payment event before, we haven't talked about payment before, but we know account, we know service agreements, we know financial transaction. So over here a few key points, I think. If you look at payment event, the tender is actually a child table of payment event. So when payment event is created, it is containing the tender of it as well as a part of the object. Now, the payment actually has a child table called the payment segment, because when we say we distribute the payment, actually it creates multiple segments. Payment itself is linked to the account, and the payment segment is linked to the service agreement. And obviously, financial transaction is created as a part of payment segment, and it is also linked to service agreements in this case as well. Okay, so that is everything for this session. It's a very quick and basic concept for payment. We will be looking at more details in terms of payments next time. Thank you very much. Bye.